Okay, can you see a screen that is mine? Additive manufacturing? Yeah, okay,
yes,
looks
very
good.
Yep.
Okay, I'm presenting. I've been working on this paper together with my colleague in Oslo, Fahad Awaleh, who was also a PhD student together with me. So we go quite a few years back because it's a few years since I did my PhD at BI, Norwegian School of Management. So anyway, we're looking into additive manufacturing. Currently, considering if it is currently a disruptive supply chain innovation. Let's see how we do this. Okay. Okay, now you see a new screen?
Yes, it is.
Okay, yes, okay.
Sorry, Professor Pri, you are unmute. Sorry. Proper.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Yeah. Now it's okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes. Loud and clear.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, this paper I have. Then I'll go a little bit back. This is I'm quite new with the Zoom, and I can't go back. So just forget it. It's I have a little bit difficulty with Zoom because I'm not so familiar with it, but everybody else has been very proficient. So yeah, there we have the first page again. Correct. So anyway, I'm writing. I have a topic on additive manufacturing currently and disruptive supply chain innovations. The question I pose. I'm writing this together with Fahad Awaleh, who I took my PhD together with. We were on scholarship in the same project. So our cooperation goes quite a few years back in time. So we look into the background and purpose of this paper. So the fundamental interest is in new technology application and additive manufacturing, which is then manifest through the 3D printers. And this is based empirically on the student thesis work, which we have the data from. And the impact of what we're looking at into our main topics are the impact of additive manufacturing on one, the supply chain structure, and number two, the degree to which additive manufacturing is a disruptive innovation. We'll look into theoretically what I mean by that. More concretely, how we have done the research is that the students that went out and did these data collection, they asked these questions. Of course, there are more than 3 questions, but these are the guiding research issues. Number one, research question 1, what characterizes additive manufacturing as a technology used by a firm? So this is a way to move from the theory or our aim into getting real answers and guiding the interview guide, if you wish. What are the uses of additive manufacturing in the supply chain structure and its impact thereafter? And number 3, what value does additive manufacturing add to the firm? So we got data more or less about these things here. And the framework we're using here is basically number 1, very important here is actually this, which is not about additive manufacturing, but it's idea about innovation. Bauer Christensen's very famous article from 1995, where they conceptualize this idea or notion of disruptive innovation as a concept, as innovation that creates a new market and organizational network, radically changing customer needs, displacing established market-leading firms, products, and alliances. So we're talking about a big change in how production and distribution is carried out. So the question is this the case? Or to what degree? So this is a way to guide our inquiry. And then at the same time, we also have this notion that we have an SCM, a supply chain management perspective. This is, of course, a very short list, but what things we are interested in here is relationships, systemic features of a complete supply chain. So if we want to look at the structure of the supply chain, we want to see how different resources and people work together. That's where the systemic comes in a systems perspective. And then we to look at the structure, which is a question about not only how things are done in relationship to each other, but also how does this look in a more long-term perspective. The structure, of course, can change, but we're talking about a slow change in the structure. And then you have the day-to-day workings, the process, the impact of how things are produced, a sequencing of logistics activities. And then also the very important is this value aspect. Who benefits from this use now of 3D printing, additive manufacturing. And finally, also an important issue is power. And we talk about, this is disruptive innovation. Is there a change in the power relationships and structures in the supply chain? So how are network relationships distorted by this emergent technology? So I'm not going to go and read this overview here. This shows a little bit how this paper is built up. The research is built up. Those who are more interested can find this figure in the paper. So we look into a little bit about the literature view first on the supply chains. First, we consider impact on structure and process. The structure may be characterized by interdependencies, integration, interaction. This is a paper I'm involved in also. Artur Janusz, and it's published in the IMP journal in 2018, where we in a manner have established a 3I model, which has not yet become as famous as the in marketing or the P model, for instance. But we believe that this is an approach to how to analyze how things are distributed, how things are produced, looking at one interdependencies, which means that the basic logic of why do we do business, why do we need the others in the network. And also, you can look at the concept which is very key to supply chain management, this idea of integration. So it's more or less the design, the pattern of the structure is integration. How close are you together? And resources coupled together, standardized, etc. And also comes with people and the culture and things like that. So the notion of integration, which is different from interdependencies. And then finally, interaction, how things are done, more or less, on a daily basis. So this is sort of a guideline how we analyze production and distribution. Another aspect we look into, which is relevant when we look into 3D printing, is the notion of local versus global. This is something which the literature has shown as very important. I've done some studies on local foods distribution, which was actually the topic one of the first times I was at the OSCM conference, and one of my publications in the OSCM journal, it was on local foods, the first time I came into the journal there. And basically, the idea is that when you do this type of additive manufacturing use, things tend to be more local. You can produce much closer to the users in a much smaller scale. So this is an issue which we identify among several. Another one is the notion of proximity to customers, which facilitates co-creation. How important is this? And this is something also discussed in literature, the idea of value co-creation, if you wish. And this is also an aspect, the things which can be discussed in this case. I will go very briefly. These are things, of course, we can each of them talk about half an hour. What's happening now? What happened to my... do you still see my PowerPoint? I lost it.
Yeah. We cannot see your PowerPoint.
You can see it, but I can't see it. Let me see if I can get it back again.
Yes, it already go back to the PowerPoint.
You can see it?
Yes, we can.
Can you see all four of the points? I pushed the wrong button now, so it just disappeared from the screen which I was using.
Okay, you may...
What happened now?
Yeah, so, okay, now we see the website. Okay, now it go back to the PowerPoint.
Yeah, good. I don't like Zoom, sorry. It's just easier on Teams, but I think I solved the problem, okay. And now we come to proximity, and then we have the consideration of new business models, focusing on proximity in business relationships. Social organizing supply, there's also a question here, and I'll try to be a little bit fast because I'm using a little bit too much time now. And network position and role, you know, about the structure and who does what in different supply chains, also an aspect. They have literature around that too, which I think are some of the issues which are important here. And then when you go to specifically additive manufacturing, this study is a few years old, and at that time, around 2017, that time period, 18 and so forth, there was not that much literature, but here are some short things we dug up, and we're not talking, there's even a journal on additive manufacturing, but this is in the field of engineering. But if we talk about within logistics supply chain management, the publication is more limited. But there has come a lot of publication in a few years, and this is very, very positive. But anyway, for instance, Bergshams and Asani from Sweden, they state that the most studies on additive manufacturing concern technology, as I just mentioned, and say that additive manufacturing be considered disruptive. Also a view. So here is somebody, Hoover and Lee, they have this view that it is disruptive from 2015, and Sundström 2016 disagrees with this based on detailed case study in his hearing aid, which is considered 3D printing. So he doesn't agree with that it's disruptive. And the same author points out that the increased use of 3D printing in hearing aid production industry was economically driven, and therefore concludes that implementation of additive manufacturing mainly involve competence destroying process of innovation rather than disruptive innovation, which means that you stupidify the users more or less. That's his research showed this. This indicates that additive manufacturing may have the same consequences as modernistic mass production, the reduction or even elimination of handcraft skills in the production of goods. So there are some views here. Anyway, I have a conclusion coming towards the end, so you will see that. Very short on methodology. This is a qualitative survey, which means that we administered the same interview guide to all 15 companies. One person answered from each company, and open-ended questionnaire. So it's a sort of a survey, but it administers questions which are then open-ended, so they talk freely about things. So it becomes like that, but compared to a case study where you have multiple methods or observation, different things like that. This is closer to a survey, but at the same time, the analysis is similar to that of a case study where you use qualitative methodology. So you use a lot of, I would call it intuition, actually. So here's a quick overview over the 15 interviews. I'm not going to read them up. So a few were, quite many were on Skype and telephone. A few were also face-to-face. And the interview guide had 6 questions, which you can see here. Resembles a lot to what you saw before. So this is actually a very simple series of interviews, but it gives quite a lot of data. The findings, for instance, when it comes to applied technology value in use, we find there are very many different views here. To some degree, companies are using it, to some degree are thinking about using it, or they're using it in, for instance, producing prototypes, which means that's not in the production, but making maybe prototypes of what may be produced and testing it out. So you see here's a lot of prototyping, for instance, and product development. So these are our findings, which are not generalizable, of course. They are just 15 different companies for telling their own stories. That's our data. So not saying this is basically the truth or anything that everybody must follow, but definitely if you read our paper, you'll see a lot of discussion about, what they do with their experiences, the users. So definitely there are interesting things there. And we do have an analysis and some conclusions, some findings as conclusion. So in the introduction of the paper, we identified the following 2 areas of research interest: the impact of additive manufacturing on supply chain structure, and to the degree which additive manufacturing is disruptive innovation. So what did we find then? So regarding the first issue, it is clear the use of additive manufacturing is primarily limited to prototyping, small-scale commercial production. That is what we found anyway. Additive manufacturing moves production closer to customer, and this increases the potential for negotiating production and adapting it to user needs. So the value aspect comes in here, of course, because you're closer to those who perceive the value, which are the users and the customers. Some firms have specialized in providing additive manufacturing as a service to other manufacturers, such as Panalpina, which is one of our informants. It's a logistics service provider, and they're working strategically to provide at their logistics centers, their hubs, also 3D printing. This is a little bit of an, I would definitely call it innovative way of thinking for a logistics company. It is not one of the biggest logistics company, but they are quite well spread out. I think it's actually a Swiss company, but they are also in Norway, for instance, also, and they are basically a typical logistics service provider. So this does, as such changes, change the value network structure because it implies outsourcing. The inter-firm borderline is here somewhat altered. So we talk about that they have companies specializing in 3D printing as a service, which is definitely of interest. When it comes to third-party logistics, 3PL way of thinking. The specialized service providers, however, often have additive manufacturing as an important part of their production technology. And so often it is companies doing it, but they rent out space too to others. They can use ask if somebody wants to use our equipment. We're using our own production because we have available capacity. That's also a picture that we found among not many, but a few. The importance of and value of this outsourcing is still limited, but gradually expanding. Many of the firms are manufacturers who have begun using additive manufacturing as an alternative, more efficient supplement to their production. In all cases, this represents a very limited value for the company. And the value of additive manufacturing is mainly associated with one-of-a-kind or small series production because it's slow and not as quick as the traditional mass production. It's a lay-on type of technology. The use of this form of production also limits the expense associated with waiting in case prototyping additive manufacturing saves production time. So there are some economic aspects here, definitely. Okay, the impact of additive manufacturing supply chain structure. Regarding the first issue, it is clear that the use of additive manufacturing, let's see, yeah. It is clear that the use of additive manufacturing is primarily limited to prototype and small-scale commercial production. Additive manufacturing moves production closer to customer. Some firms have specialized in providing additive manufacturing service. This I already read, I think I did. Yeah. Is it a disruptive innovation? The importance and value of this outsource is still limited, but gradually expanding. Many of the firms are manufacturers who have begun using additive manufacturing as an alternative, more efficient supplement to their production. In all cases, this represents a very limited value of the company. The value of additive manufacturing through the use of 3D printers is mainly associated with one-of-a-kind or small-scale series, saves time. And in the case of commercial production, reduces the need to store in warehouse parts that are seldom needed or alternative in order to wait for them from an external supplier. That's also an important issue. The use of 3D printer provides savings in logistics and prototyping costs. This use, however, changes the existing supply chain structure only to a minor degree. The flow of goods is, however, in general, radically changed from the use of 3D printing since raw materials are streamed further downstream for small-scale production. Still, the use of 3D printing in networks is limited. So if you look at the industry, it's still not very disruptive, actually, per se. It is natural to conclude that there is potential of technologically improved 3D printers. Together with increased new technology, this implies increased need to consider this innovation disruptive. So our conclusion based on our data actually is that, okay, it is not a disruptive innovation, as Sundström said, but maybe in a different way, because we look at the supply chain structure that mainly the use is limited. So you're not seeing so much of it, but what is happening, this change is very great from year to year. And this increasing use definitely will lead to that when you start producing things closer to the users, it will be disruptive. Maybe it's already there already. That's definitely a possibility. So it has an impact on supply chain structure. It's our data shows that it's not yet there, but it will be coming. These data are from maybe about 2 years ago, 2018, and I think already in this 2 years' time, I've had some contacts with industry, and my idea that today, if we did the same interviews, I think to a much greater degree, we will see that we are now actually crossed the borderline, and so much use that we are now seeing a picture where it is a disruptive innovation. So that was my presentation. Any questions? So we have a picture of Magritte here, the famous Belgian artist. I don't think in the 1920s there was 3D printing, but anyway, it's an innovative use of the piping.
Professor Per, there is some question.
Okay,
may I read the question for you?
Yep.
Okay, there is one from Losa Juan. How do you analyze the data?
Okay, this is qualitative data. So basically, we take the literature and we compare the literature, the concepts with the data. Of course, everything is all mixed together. So when we collect data, it's also theory driven. And then when we come back, we just look at the data, the theory driven answers, because we're using questionnaire, which is theory driven. And then we look at the answers which are written down, which are of course literature, what we can call stories or narratives is maybe a way to say it. And then we have to look at these texts, these literature, these narratives which come from the informants, and then we compare it again with our concepts, our models, which I showed you a little bit about, and then we discuss this. That's how we do it. Very simple. Because this is the reason we do it this way here, which is a rather phenomenological way to go, is that we're basically very explorative, this extremely explorative type of research. We go out and we just try to find out things. When we started with this, we really had very little literature, very little knowledge about this, except for the technology view aspect, which was quite well developed and so forth. But we're looking here mainly from our management point of view at the use of the technology, which is different from the technology itself. But of course, it has something to do with the technology.
Okay, thank you, Professor Park. There is another one. This is maybe comment from Amulia Gutu. Very good presentation. You may like to add the environmental impact of additive manufacturing in your future research.
Yeah, this is something I think is coming more and more. That part of, if you think about teaching in business schools, for instance, already I teach this already, but it's not like a main subject, not a course, but it's in the course. We mention it. Yeah. I even had an exam where I had a case. This case here, I gave as an exam a case narrative. I produced it and gave it to my students to analyze it in supply chains, etc. A couple of years ago. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, Professor, there is another one question about how about the intellectual property issues?
Property issues.
Intellectual property issues.
Intellectual property issues, patents, etc. I'm not really, I haven't really gone so much into that idea, but the way I understand 3D printing, it is a form of manufacturing. And if you come to patents or property issue design, there is really no change. There's still those issues. Either you produce them small scale or large scale, but here you're using like patterns or designs, I think. So definitely it is an issue. How this is organized, how this is done, definitely I see the point, but I haven't studied that. It's a little bit like IT software, yeah? Because this is electronically, and you have a design for some type of plastic, whatever it is, you know, and maybe it's original, and but this is always in 3D printing, always stored electronically. So it's like a computer program in a manner somehow.
Okay, thank you, Professor Clark. I think we can continue to the next presenter. Thank you so much, Professor Clark.
I'll try to unshare my screen here.
Sure.
Or maybe Devanti can unshare it. I'm trying to click here and having some, let's see, yeah, stop sharing.